Good evening, and good evening to you. WeatherBrains episode number 806. This is for June the 28th, 2021. It's the pre-show, the magical time of the program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say outrageous things. So took a week off last week that was needed and appreciated. And we are back on schedule this week to do a Monday night routine show, but it's going to be a good one. I see Harold Brooks, the legend, will be on the show tonight. We're going to talk tornado outbreaks, severe weather. It's my wheelhouse. It's going to be a good show. Can't wait. So let's get everybody online here. Got the embed code going. Spent some time in the Northeast United States last week. Up in Massachusetts most of the week last week. Had a great time. And a chance to take in a couple of Red Sox games, lobster rolls. The Friday night game was really good. They had the tribute to Dustin Pedroia, who, was a legendary Red Sox player and had his big bash, and the Yankees were in town. And we had a great time at Fenway and spent some time at Martha's Vineyard. I have never been there before. That was a new location for me. My wife and I have been married 40 years, and they said it would never last. What do they know? But we went to Martha's Vineyard for much of the week and had a great time. It really did surpass expectations. I never have high expectations wherever I go somewhere. And if you don't, that means if it's good, it's really special. And that was just a great trip. And baseball was good. It was great. So thank you for letting us do two shows a couple of weeks ago. And we are back on schedule. I have one more vacation week. The way, my typical vacation schedule, it's the same like every year. I take 1 week in June, and then 1 week at the end of July or the 1st of August, and then another week at Christmas. And that's really it. I just get 3 weeks, and I might take a day off here or there, but I've not really had a day off since last year. So considering all of the things that have happened, it's been everybody talks about how 2020 was bad. 2021 has not been really good around here for me. I guess it started back in March 25th, had a tornado hit the house. And then had just a tragic death in the family here at the TV station a couple of weeks ago. So 2021 has not been a good year for me. So it was great to get away. Hello, Jen.
Hi, good evening. Good to see you. Welcome back.
You got a great voice. I mean, I wish.
Thank you.
No, it's just like natural. See, I have to fake it. To do my good voice, it's fake. My natural voice is just some South Alabama hillbilly.
No,
it's not good. Where yours is natural. Troy's got a little bit of Mississippi in him too. I mean,
hi y'all.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
There's
Kim. Little Mississippi in him.
Yeah. There's Kim.
Hey guys, how are you? Is my audio okay? My toddlers kind of got to my blue snowflake, so I need to replace it. But is this okay?
Loud and clear. Sounds excellent.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Good. I've sent the link, James, to our guests. So, looks like Paulina's joining
they're
us.
both here just
Yay.
immediately. There they are. So,
Hello. Hi, Paulina.
Hi. Hello. Thank you. Good to see you. Hello, everyone.
hello.
Hello, Paulina.
hear
How
me?
are you? Mr. Brooks, Dr. Brooks.
Yeah. We made it finally.
Harold is the Elvis of St. Louis.
Yeah.
I mean, let me tell you what, you go to St. Louis with this guy, he is like Elvis. I mean, it's just like, he's kind of a big deal. When he comes into a building, when he leaves a building, I mean, they make the announcement. It's just like awesome.
Hey, James, we were up there a couple of weeks ago and had appropriate dinner.
Yes.
And had Had the chef came out to greet us and all that other good stuff. So,
Oh, yeah. That was so good. Oh, goodness gracious.
Hey, I want you to know they've done well in the last year or so.
Really?
They apparently what Mark was saying was that they had so many people who basically called them every day and wanted to donate to hospitals and stuff like that. They said he was actually busier. Normally in restaurants you got some evenings off.
Right.
They were just constant every day. They were delivering stuff. So they did.
Wow.
They came out pretty well out of it. So
That's awesome. Not everybody came out well.
no,
so
not at all. Not at all.
Well, let's get this thing started here, but we don't want to miss the good stuff. So Bill Murray is out. Let's see. Aubrey, I don't know if she's in or out tonight, but anyway. All right, record track 1, record track 2, and here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. WeatherBrains episode number 806. This is for the 29th of June, 2021. Back on a Monday night after a little week off. Troy, did you ever feel like you need a week off, sometimes? I mean, you probably need a week off, don't you?
I need the last 2 years off. So
show title.
Yeah.
We have a show
Last
title
2
right out of the gate.
2020, 2021, they just suck. So
So you are still at the Homewood Suites?
yeah, they're getting the house getting the house back together after the winter storm, and I'm hoping that the contractor will remain alive until that is finished.
What?
I'm supposed to move back in the house this coming weekend. You supposedly next Monday night will see me with somewhat of an office. I don't know at this point whether there'll be any furniture in there, but there is actually a computer in that standing by itself. So get moved back in the house certainly before next Monday night. And now the contractors have been good. They're just slow, and everyone knows that. They tell you it's going to be ready here, but it's ready there. So it's getting there.
So let's review real quick. But for those that don't know, Troy had,
Now let's talk about. I mean, this is really the WeatherBrains who got taken out in the last year, or close to it, and what Paulina and Harold and Jen just kind of ducking low there is that, of all the people on the Hollywood Squares tonight, y'all are next. I mean,
No, we're not next. Some of us have had other things.
We started out with me in the winter storm, and the water chased me out of the house when it's 3 degrees, and then James was next, and then the night I watched Kim's house get pounded by 3-inch hail. I said, well, that's 3 of us, but we're moving on.
Hey, I already got my new roof.
Yeah, I had a feeling,
and my gutters from the ice storm in October, the gutters.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was
yeah. No,
that's right. The ice storm season started out there in October. Right. That's nuts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Gosh.
And we're lucky. We're lucky when it comes down to it, because I got an insurance company that's paid for everything. They haven't asked any questions, and contractors smiled and grinned. I think they probably have things in their ears, but they don't want to hear me. But we're lucky, in a way. We got a place to stay, and that's good.
No, there are many people displaced by all of these horrible weather disasters we have encountered that don't have insurance. They don't have resources, and there's real human suffering. So, I mean,
there really is. And, you can't get stuff. I've wanted to talk about supply chain stuff ever since this has started, because, you can't get stuff. You can't get stuff the supply chain in this country is just amazing. That it's hard to get stuff nowadays. Any stuff. I'm not just talking about building stuff.
Right.
Yep. It's tough.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah, but for us with our roof, the contractor said, I can get you charcoal gray tomorrow. If you want another color, it might be 6 months.
Yeah.
And we said, well, charcoal gray is just not my favorite color.
So Jen, you've had no weather disasters this week, have you?
Not this week, but you know what? I'm thinking I may have started this mess, because I actually
it's all your fault.
It is my fault.
What did you do?
My roof, well, I had a hail damage late last summer. and I had to have my roof replaced. So I may have started this mess.
Okay, Kim, let's go
So
get her.
it's going to circle back to me. So I'll be coming up again.
Oh boy. All right. Well, Dr. Cloco McLean, let's bring in our guests before they run.
Yeah.
Yes, and in the case of Paulina, especially if she was to try to run, I mean, she's on an island now. She's in Hawaii. She used to be in at the University of Oklahoma here, and we'll get her backstory in a second. But she'd run just straight into an ocean. So let's not have you run away from us, not just yet. It's great to have you both from the varied time zones that we have people joining us from today. So with us we have friend of the show, Dr. Harold Brooks from the National Severe Storms Laboratory. He's been on before. We had some debate about how long it's been. I feel like it hasn't been too long. Harold said, oh, it's been years. But COVID time is a very strange creature. So it feels like a whole other lifetime ago. But it's great to have you back, Harold.
It's good to be back.
And we also have Paulina Swick, and she is a graduate student. She's in her PhD at the University of Oklahoma, although she's still finishing it, though she has recently just transitioned to being remote from Hawaii, which I think is just a little bit unfair, but I'm gonna let you get away with it because you're really great. But, it's a great place to telework from, to be a student at the University of Oklahoma. Thank you very much for joining us, Paulina.
Thank you so much. It's a really great pleasure for me. Indeed, I am in Hawaii. I don't know if I can go any farther west than this, so there's no need to be afraid of me running away. But I'm really fortunate and so happy that I can be here physically in Hawaii and also virtually on the talk today.
That's great to have you. And I actually think it'd be really lovely to start with you and learn a little bit more about your backstory. For those who are listening and watching, they might hear you and wonder, well, that's an interesting accent. Where might you be from? I doubt it's Oklahoma. And what might have brought you into this wonderful field of ours from wherever you're from? I'd love you to just share that story, and everyone can listen, who's listening can sit back, relax for just a minute, because what I love about her story is that it highlights some wonderful things about our field, including just how kind so many people are, and that kindness and inclusivity really marks the story of how we got Paulina, and she ended up with us tonight. So Paulina, tell us a little bit about where you're from. What started you down this path? It's a little bit unexpected, right?
She's not an Okie from Muskogee. We know that.
She's not.
Yes, absolutely. I, despite my best efforts, my Oklahoman accent is quite poor, or any even American accent, but I'm trying my best. I'm originally from Poland. I was born in I'm just kidding. My story is, quite untraditional in sense that there is a lot of stories out there of weather or climate, passionate people who curiosity of research subject was sparked by either an event that was happening in their neighborhood or town, or maybe the other option would be that people have actual fear of storms and of lightning and different phenomena, and that eventually change with time and maybe some research into passion. Well, I'm actually none of that because I am actually a classically trained musician. I played violin since I was 7 years old. I toured Europe with many concerts with an international orchestra, and eventually graduated from Conservatory of Music in Poznań. So my idea for life was to basically be a professional musician and play with orchestra. Now, life writes its own scenarios. So in my case, that meant that I believe at the beginning of the Conservatory of Music, I hurt my hand really, really badly. And I had to take a break from playing. So I realized that, hey, it's a good idea to have a plan B or something just in case. So I applied to Adam Mickiewicz University, which was also in Poznań. into geography program because I felt like geography was always the coolest class in school, after music, that is. And that was a fantastic choice. We had during this program, there was a lot of field projects that were offered, and we could choose for the grad school specialization, and I chose meteorology. I remember my first meeting with Professor Dr. Kolendowicz at the university. He asked me what I would like to do for my research thesis. And I briefly mentioned something about hail, but I believe, unfortunately, we didn't have good access to the data or something like that. So my professor asked me, hey, what do you think about tornadoes? I think we can do some synoptic characteristic of them, because we do actually have some tornadoes in Poland and some data. I said, yes, absolutely. But professor, just one question, what is a tornado? I had no idea at the time. And that was the beginning of a practically new chapter in my life, because I started with some literature review, conversation with older student Mateusz Tasarek, who is now also in the United States and doing his research on tornadoes and storms. I watched some YouTube videos and I realized that in the United States, sky from time to time decides to reach down to earth and tries to kill people. And it was absolutely puzzling. I wanted to understand that. I wanted to learn more. So I Googled two words, meteorology and conference. And first thing that popped up was AMS conference in Phoenix in Arizona. So I believe over the summer 2014, I worked what I could, catering, cooking, cleaning, bodyguarding, anything that I could, saved some money, got my ticket. And in January 2015, I flew to the United States to learn what I possibly could about tornadoes from the best people in the weather community. And that was also the beginning of the adventure with the United States. And that story actually includes two Americans and a book. So during that conference, you can search different talks, presentations, sometimes by word. So my word of choice was, of course, tornado. So I found whatever I could with tornado in the title. And so it happened that Rick Smith from Norman had at least maybe 3 or 4 presentations or talks about tornadoes in the title. So I went to all of them and I was completely mesmerized by all the presentations and fantastic work that he was doing with his team. So after one of the presentations, I gathered all courage I could and went to him to talk a little bit and congratulate him on the presentation. And I actually asked him if there is a possibility, I would love to come to Norman just for a day or even an hour, and I would love to just observe and look and listen what I can as they work. I know that it's maybe something too brave to ask for, but I really, really wanted to not finish this amazing story and meeting with him. And he said that he will see what he can do. And he shared his business card with me. So that was American number 1. And the very same evening, I wandered around AMS booth, and I believe they were selling some books. And it was quite empty that evening because I believe it was maybe the last evening of the conference. And my eye caught a remarkable book entitled Living on the Real World, How Thinking and Acting Like Meteorologists Will Help Save the Planet. I have this book with me here. The title was fabulous, and I was really mesmerized. And behind, at that moment when I was looking through the book, behind my back, I hear this deep voice asking if I liked that book. I turned around and I saw that there was this tall gentleman who was smiling to me. I said, absolutely. I thought he might be also interested in that book himself. So I pointed out the title and told him that, the title is so exciting. The book must be good as well. And he should definitely check it out. Of course, he noticed my accent. So he asked where I'm from and what brought me in. We started the chat really briefly. I told him, well, tornadoes, I wanted to learn more. I don't know if he knew, but hey, in the United States, you actually have tornadoes and they are so dangerous and it's so puzzling how they form, and that we have them in Poland too, but not like that, not so much like in the United States. So finally he asked me, he was really curious, and he asked me, if I came with some team or with a professor, if I had presentation or maybe poster. And I said, no, none of that. I just came just like that because, I just want to learn a little bit. And he then asked me to follow him. We approached a cash register area, and he reached to his pocket, got his credit card out, and bought my book. Can you imagine that? I mean, it was my book, and I picked it up. But then he smiled to me and he said, my name is Bill Hook, and I'm actually the author of that book. And at that time, at first I was thinking, that doesn't make sense, because you're right, you are the author. Why would you buy your own book, right? That doesn't add up. But then he said that actually this copy is for you. And at that point, my heart dropped and I was surprised and I didn't know what to say. He said though, and that he will give me this book under one condition. And he said, see, you are here alone. You came from Poland to learn more about the tornadoes, and it's, quite a distance. And I see that you are passionate and that you want to learn more and become a researcher. So there's my condition. One day, once you are established scientist and publish a book, and you will meet enthusiastic students just like I'm meeting you right now, you will also buy your own book for that student, so that we continue to pass the knowledge to the best of our ability to the younger generation. And then he signed a book for me with a little note, with a little inscription, and gave it to me. And he added, if you run into any trouble here in United States, or need anything, just let me know. Here is my business card. And then he smiled and he wished me good evening and he left. So that is the story of two Americans in a book. And the reason I am mentioning is this whole story is that 2 weeks after the AMS, I contacted Rick Smith, again asking if I can come. To my surprise, he actually responded and he said, well, we can see what we can do, but Lance Radfush, the director of the NSSL, asked to provide recommendation letters, and at least one of them from an American. And well, the only other American that I knew except Rick was Bill. So I thought, well, I can try and reach out to him and ask for help. But, except this very brief conversation, very brief meeting, he didn't really know me. So why would he? How could he? I couldn't imagine. But really, to my astonishment, he did agree and wrote a beautiful letter, explained that he really doesn't know me, but based on our short conversation during the AMS, he would give me a chance. So as I later learned from wonderful Kelly Pirtle, who at the time was processing my documents. She works for NSSL. She was in touch with Rick Smith, that this letter from Bill was the deal breaker. And because of it, I was allowed to come to NSSL, to Norman, and to learn from the best scientists I could possibly dream of about the weather and climate. So that's not necessarily in a nutshell, but definitely my story, how I got to United States.
Well, I love it. And thank you so much for sharing it. It looks like, Troy, if you maybe have a comment, but I'd really quickly want to say, if there's anything that I love as much as the atmosphere, possibly more, it's the people who study it. Our field is unbelievably wonderful. And the story you just told those people, Rick Smith is near and dear to this show. He used to be one of the WeatherBrains panelists, and I think it surprises nobody that he was so generous, and Bill Hook as well. So you really hit the right people, and Providence brought you to us. So we're pretty excited. Troy, did you have something you wanted to chime in with?
No, I just think that, I mean, like you said, Kim, it's an amazing story, Paulina. I mean, it truly is. And I think what you said at the very beginning, I'm one of those people that started out as I pointed out on the show before, one of those people in kindergarten in the first grade, Harold and Jen and Kim and James, that every bit of thunder and light, it horrified me. It just scared me. And it was one of those cases that I think, and Paulina kind of indicates this, that we're teachers. I mean, now these were teachers, James in my day, these were teachers that, carried the tablet up the hill, but, back in the days, teachers, they sent us to this place called the library until they ran out of weather books in the second and third grades. And it went from there. And so it really is true. I think I just enjoyed that story, Paulina. And I think that so many people that are in our field have that. I don't know, Harold, it seems like it's just like an event or something that started us in this field more than I see in any other field.
I think that's part of it, is that for a lot of people, we have that sort of shared, I mean, you experience the weather whether you're studying it or not. And so it's you can kind of do it, all the time. If you want to be a quantum physicist, it's a little hard to do in your day-to-day, growing up experience.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
I thought it was great. I'm highly encouraged, just because it's your passion and passion coming out in your voice, and you're like, this is what I'm going to do, and you just pursued it. And I think that's great. And there's so many stories in meteorology where that's what folks do.
Yep.
You're not necessarily going to be a rich person being a meteorologist, and it's not about that. It's about, you love the weather, you love the atmosphere, you love teaching people and all that. And you can hear that I'm really excited to hear more of your story. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That is so sweet and so lovely. One thing that, it's for many people back home, back in Europe, even around here, the kindness and the sweetness of people, of scientists, and the passion and this type of trust towards the younger generation that I was blessed to receive from Rick and from Bill Hook and Kelly and Harold and Renee, my advisor, and so many other professors. This is just so beautifully, I don't know if unique to this field, but I certainly see this over and over again, and I absolutely love this, and I am so thankful I can be part of that.
Well, we are too. We're very glad to have you. And at this point, I think it's a good moment to bring in Harold. He chimed in a bit, there with some comment on the backstory. But Harold, let's talk a little bit about how it is that you came to be acquainted with Paulina. We're going to talk a little bit today about a research partnership that the two of you had in a paper that you've written together about something to do with tornadoes. But tell us a little bit about how you came to be acquainted.
Well, we get requests at the lab from foreign nationals who want to come to the lab and want to spend time, and that's always a challenging thing to do, especially when they want to be there for more than a week. If nothing else, the paperwork is a burden that we have to think about, and can we actually really help this person, and do we think they can contribute to what we do? And so when Kelly Pirtle was tasked with looking through helping with her paperwork, she came to me and said, okay, is this person legitimate? Because as Paulina said, she'd met Rick and she talked to Bill Hook, but we really don't know very much. And can she, do we think academically she can do things? And I've been involved with the European severe weather community for, since the late 1990s. And I've been to every one of the European severe weather conferences. And so I happen to know a lot of people over there. And I said, well, okay, she's from Poland. Let me see who I know from Poland. Let me do some checking around. And so I started sending emails. Do you know this person? is this is this legitimate? And because we need to be able to provide a little bit of documentation to come, and people all said yes, she was, and that she was good, and that it's like, okay, we'll take a shot at it. And I was willing to do what I needed to do, signing off on things to make sure we got things going on, and it's worked out, I think, pretty well over the years, and hopefully we'll continue to do so.
So what was the research problem space that you tried to bring Paulina into?
Well, we're interested in really sort of, I'm interested in tornadoes everywhere, and really in looking at in some sense at looking at trying to understand how what we know in the U.S. Applies to what we know about Europe and vice versa. I did some work some years ago where it looks like, for instance, that a lot of the European tornado environments, they look at their average conditions, look a lot like U.S. Southeastern U.S. cool season tornado events. That's where that's the phase space they live in a lot. And so I've always thought that the European problem could teach us a lot about forecasting issues that we have. And I also have an interest in trying to do some stretching of how far back we know about U.S. tornado events. And in particular, we for the really, really big events, so the April 27th, the April 3rd, 74th, the next one before that that's comparable is 1932 and then 1920 and 1908 and 1881. And we don't really have much that goes back that, it really goes back that far. And so we've been trying to do some things that'll try to help us understand those environments better and come up with some tools that'll be able to help us look further back. In particular, we need to do some pattern analysis stuff, and we've got some ideas to do that. And so that became the question of how do we actually look at the patterns associated with big tornado days, and can we see what they've done over the years, and can we actually start to learn some things that will allow us to characterize their behavior over the last century or more. We're making progress on it, and then Paulina's been. I've got sort of 2 or 3 different sets of folks I interact with on this problem. Paulina's on one of the threads as we go along and trying to do that.
So you're really interested in understanding the underlying probability of tornado occurrence and how that might be changing. Yeah. And as you've described it, as you go into that work, there are a couple of phrases that you hear people say that can sometimes be ambiguous, if not a hurdle, to actually understanding what's going on. What are those phrases?
Well,
and, what were the things that keep you up at night about the research that's going on in this area?
The research. I was going to say.
Sorry. Let's be specific.
It's the cat's letting me know that there's no food in the bowl that keeps me up at night a lot. But no, I think that there's a set of things. One is that I got into looking at climate and severe weather long ago, based on the phrase of people saying, well, as the planet warms up, there'll be more energy for storms, there'll be more tornadoes will get worse. And I've been around forecasting long enough to know, well, we don't just look at CAPE. And so trying to figure out how we put the ingredients together and how the other ingredients might change. And there's also, I think, one of the real, sort of touchstone questions I've always had is, and we get this, particularly those of us who work at the lab, have gotten this over the years from lots of places about, the joke years ago about it was the Central Oklahoma Radar Laboratory to study storms. There were people who would say things like that. And really what it came down to was how much of what we really know about how the atmosphere works is because of the limited set of things that we've seen. And how much do we truly understand physically how the atmosphere works? I believe that if you put the exact same weather conditions in any place on the planet, exact same atmospheric conditions, it'll make the same weather. The problem is that we don't necessarily see all of the possible supportive environments very often where we live. And there might be other places that have favorable conditions that we just never sample those in the places where we've tended to look in the past. And that sort of says there's a limit on how we really understand about how the atmosphere works. And that's something I'd like to, I like to understand things from as close to first principles as we possibly can. Because then when the unusual situation comes up, you go, well, yeah, it's unusual for us here, but boy, you know, our friends in other places get these things all the time. And this is what the weather that occurs out of it is.
Mm-hmm. So, when it comes to tornadoes in particular, people classically think of the plains in a phrase called Tornado Alley.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that, reminding me of that. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So there are. Yeah. I'll try to answer the question you were trying to ask earlier. There's a couple of things. One is that we have some colloquial phrases we use that don't have real technical meanings. And one of them's Tornado Alley. Yep. And I unfortunately did a figure years ago in a paper where we were trying to make a figure that looked like what people seemed to describe as Tornado Alley, and it wasn't just occurrence. It was the strong seasonal cycle that we see in the plains both of those things were involved. It wasn't just occurrence. The other one is outbreak. Everybody, the definition there's no formal definition for an outbreak. There were people who will say that the 8 or the 6 tornadoes reported in Michigan on was it Sunday or Saturday, that was an outbreak. Well, yeah, if you define it, kind of, maybe it works out as that. I think we all agree that April 27th was an outbreak. And we probably all agree that the little teeny tiny tornado that, happened, some isolated tornado that happened somewhere in the middle of Kansas one day a couple of weeks ago, that probably wasn't an outbreak. But in between is kind of a gray thing, and it helps us understand those kinds of colloquial phrases, because they do get used a lot. I think help in some sense. They help and hinder the public in understanding what actually the true threats are. So I want to try to get a better feel for what those things mean and how different people refer to them.
Right. It's so interesting to think about, tornado outbreaks, that phrase, that's something people will get in, knock down, drag out fights over, especially when it comes to things like forecast verification. Storm Prediction Center puts out a high risk, it better be an outbreak. And if it's a couple of tornadoes, right, even if they've made a very small area, and it technically verifies, you'll get a lot of people who will have questions about, well, that's just your verification system, but I don't think it was an outbreak because those tornadoes were brief. Well, what does it mean to actually have an outbreak then? It is really important for what you're talking about, the public, helping them understand, and knowing what they're perceiving, knowing what we even mean.
I think about somebody like James. If James uses the word, looks like we might have a tornado outbreak tomorrow, my guess is your audience will take some meaning from that phrase that may or may not be what you meant.
Exactly.
And you may want to avoid the word, even though in some sense it's a nice shorthand for communicating a whole bunch of other things potentially in the background.
Mm-hmm. And it gets a lot of attention. So let's dive a little bit more into, right, and that can be a good thing, but it needs to be harnessed carefully. So let's take a little bit of a deep dive into tornado outbreaks. Paulina, you teamed up with Harold to look at this problem.
And Renee, let's not
Renee, yes,
your
Dr.
former
Renee
advisor,
McPherson.
short shrift, yes.
My former advisor, the reason that I'm here and exists. Yeah, right. I guess she's sort of important to mention too. Yes. So the three of you, I should say, teamed up and looked at this question, and we're looking at what is a tornado outbreak. So Paulina, you have recently lead authored a paper that was just published in the BAMS, the Bulletin of the AMS, which I think is really fitting, given your story, the bulletin of the society that brought you to us. It's a really great accomplishment to get a paper in there. And in that paper, you describe your research on tornado outbreaks. So tell us a little bit about what were you looking at and what did you find?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So this paper is essentially a literature review, a paper of the diverse and ambiguous meanings of a tornado outbreak term that was used in the meteorological literature of United States from 1950 to, I believe, 2019, so almost till recently, in context of severe weather events with multiple tornadoes. But the exact meaning of the word or the term evolved over the years, and that evolution dependent on multiple factors, such as availability of the scientific data, changes to tornado reporting practices, the advancements in the technology, such as introduction of Doppler radar or satellite observation. And most importantly, the meaning of tornado outbreak changed over the years depending on the intended purpose of the definition. So, for example, some definitions were used in context of climatological research. Some of the definitions were used for assessments of mesoscale or synoptic conditions associated with a particular event, and some other definitions were used in connection to global pattern or global scale pattern analyses and let's say hazard assessment. So there are very different reasons for why people would use those definitions, and in our paper we try to explore these changes over time and the perception, and we try to highlight the importance or limitation and also potential future of evolution of what defines tornado outbreak.
So as you went through, sort of that that really interesting history, and it's clear that we're able to observe these events better. Harold, what did that leave you with? What would you say defines a tornado outbreak?
Well, as one of my long-standing traditions, one of my best things is to be able to just not answer a question, and so we were we really couldn't come up with a specific agreed upon definition. I think we could imagine lots of things, like you could count the number of tornadoes, the intensity, the aerial coverage, the time extent, how much, what the impacts were. You could all include all of those things. And in reality, in some sense, the real answer is that it depends on what you want to do with the data. What do you want to do with it? If you're going to do extensive hourly hand analyses, doing that for 100 events would be a lot. If you're wanting to do large statistical analyses, having only 10 events that's just nothing. And so it depends upon the purpose. And I think one of the really messages that I'd like to make sure we get across is that certainly in the scientific literature, you shouldn't use the phrase tornado outbreak without defining exactly what you mean. Because I just recently was involved in an exercise with a group of with a committee that I'm a part of, that they were showing some maps and they didn't make any sense to me. And I said, well, how'd you get that? And he goes, well, we use this equation. And they showed the equation, and then I'm going, really? I'm not sure about that. And he goes, oh yeah, we did this. And I go, well, that's not what the equation did. Oh yeah, that's what the equation did. And I said, well, look, that equation is from Brooks et al. 2003. I know what I wrote. And I guarantee you what you have done is exactly what shouldn't be done. And
this is
the same
outstanding.
thing. If I say the word outbreak, and if I use the word outbreak in something, and I've defined it as, well, it has to have at least 25 F1 and greater tornadoes, at least 5 F3 and greater tornadoes over this area and this particular time. And then someone else comes along and uses the word outbreak. Well, as long as there's at least 10 tornadoes that occur in a 24-hour period somewhere in the United States, I'm going to call that an outbreak. Our results are going to be really different because we aren't actually doing the same thing. We tried to use that shorthand phrase in a way that confuses things. And I think more than anything, different people can use that, will want to use a different meaning, and we just have to be really careful when you write those kinds of things. So that James, again, if he wants to call something, if he's going to use the word outbreak in his forecast, he probably needs to use it the same way every time, and not just do, there's going to be one tornado that hits one county tomorrow in Alabama, and call that an outbreak. And on another day, he's going to call, there's 30 tornadoes in the state, most of them violent, coming across the state, and call that an outbreak, because those aren't the same things, and you don't want the same response. That's, I think, the biggest message is there's a variety of definitions that people have used, and you just have to make sure you define it clearly when you write about it.
A really interesting question, I think, for the whole panel here. And something that, in talking with Harold and Paulina before this, we discussed. What would you say about the Joplin case?
Yeah.
Does that deserve to be called a tornado outbreak?
I mean, if I recall correctly, there's the tornado at Joplin, and there were some tornadoes up in Minnesota, northern Iowa and Minnesota. Oh, is that an outbreak? I don't know. I mean, that's by a lot of definitions, the answer is no. By a lot of other definitions, the answer is yes. And but it's clearly a very different thing than if we even think about something, relatively close to there. There was a really big day in May of 2003, where they had a lot more tornadoes over the southern part of Missouri, eastern Kansas. Didn't have nearly the death tolls, but it was more tornadoes in a fairly contiguous area. And yeah, Joplin's one of those gray cases that most of the definitions I would use that I would be comfortable with an outbreak wouldn't include it.
I'm just some old country boy from Alabama, Kim, but to me, no, I would not call that an outbreak. That's just my opinion. Again, what Dr. Brooks says is all that matters, because he's smarter than everybody else in this thing combined here. But I don't think it's appropriate to call that an outbreak. I mean, super outbreak of 1974, 2011. Those are the easy ones. The question is
how far down the
right. That's right, and it's just hard to define.
What was April 26th, 2011 an outbreak? Mississippi.
That's a darn good question.
Right. And that's a different level of gray.
Right. In April 15th of 2011, we call that the forgotten tornado outbreak.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
but to me, that was an outbreak because we had, over 3 dozen here that day.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, that's one of those things that, people, to me, one of the things that, when I do a lot of the history stuff, people don't realize that even without April 27th, April of 2011 was an incredibly huge month for tornadoes in the U.S. It would be memorable without April 27th. And that's, I think, one of the, there are a lot of days that are forgotten. I mean, April 16th in the Carolinas, it's the biggest tornado day in the Carolinas ever. And there's a bunch of other days that month that would fit into ordinarily we would think as being one of the biggest days of the year.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's almost this emotional sense people attach to the phrase, that if it's something that it was impactful, that it's a way to show that it mattered. I wasn't just in a tornado, I was in an outbreak. Right. And there's something about it that makes it, that conveys that you really went through something quite devastating, when it really only takes one. And that's something that's really hard to get across to people. I think it's something that's a difficulty of even the Storm Prediction Center's risk categorization system, which relies on there being some number of tornado zero coverage as a part of that formula. And they've struggled with, well, how do we convey that you might only get a couple, but if you get them, they could be really, really, really bad. And this is what, Rick Smith does say, it only takes one. So we maybe do ourselves a little bit of a disservice attaching so much to a term like that. And we almost feel like, well, those terms should be reserved for the days where disasters happen, but it's not quite that simple.
Yeah, I think we do this with a lot of weather things. I mean, I think back to the ice storm in October in the Norman area, and I remember hearing some folks talking about, well, this wasn't nearly as bad as the as the ice storm in 2009. And one of the big differences was this one happened when the trees, it's October, the trees are all leafed out. Well, I live in Old Norman. We've got pecan trees, oak trees, sycamore trees, all within view of where I'm sitting right now. This was a much more devastating ice storm than the 2009 was in my neighborhood. And if you were in one of the newer parts of Norman where there aren't very many trees or they aren't very big, it wasn't as big of a deal. But for those of us who live in the huge treed area, this was an amazing event. And so you only go just 2 or 3 miles on a widespread synoptic event. And our interpretation of what level of disaster this was changes dramatically. And with tornadoes, I think it's even a harder problem, because it's, if the Joplin tornado, meteorologically was very, very much like the Pitcher, Oklahoma tornado 3 years before, and only about 20 miles away. It's just that Pitcher was the largest town that was hit in 2008. There's I think 24 people who were killed in the tornado. If the Joplin tornado is 5 miles south of its location or 5 miles north of its location, the death toll is probably less than 30. And so it might not have even gotten a whole lot of national publicity. But our impression is of the day changes by the single event.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm interested, Jen, I'd really love to bring you into this conversation, because for those who don't, on our panelists, and I guess especially who aren't familiar with Jen, she runs a great program that's focused on tornado stories. And, Jen, what do you use when I've heard you talk about tornado outbreaks? What do you use as your definition, and how did you arrive at it?
Well, a lot of times it is it's based on what we're reading, and I don't think I have a full definition, honestly. And I agree with James. Like, I didn't think that Joplin would have been an outbreak. I think it has to do more with how many occurred, and not necessarily the rating. So if I see it more as if there were above 10 or more than 15. I do like what Harold was saying in terms of it was a big tornado day. I've used that before too, but for me, it's how many. It's not necessarily what even the rating was, because whether it was an F1 or an F3, it still had an impact on people's property, or it may have caused a fatality. And so I go with more of a number. That's just how my gut with it. And when writing, it has to do with how many it happened.
Mm-hmm. James, do you ever get feedback from any of your viewers if there have been events where you've really highlighted the risk of tornadoes, and maybe you do get a large number, but they're small, weak, brief, and miraculously don't hit a lot? I remember there being an event, I'm trying to remember the year, it was something like 2015 or 16, where there had been an event like that, where I think SPC went high risk in the South. And that's what transpired, was a number of weaker tornadoes. And one of the Storm Prediction Center forecasters who was responsible for making that decision, I think, was Ariel Cohen. And he was receiving a lot of feedback about that not being an outbreak, and that shouldn't have verified the high risk, though it technically did. So I'm really interested in knowing, from your communities, do you hear this, or is this something that in the meteorological community we do a lot of, navel gazing almost about it, and we sweat it where maybe other people don't?
Haters gonna hate. Look, anytime there's a high risk, the haters are going trolls.
Yep.
They just come out in mass. I don't know what it is. It is the most bizarre thing. But yeah, and I think it has to do with population bias again. If you have a day in which you have 30 tornadoes, and they're mostly out in the country, and you don't have a single death, people think it's a bust. Well, goodness, you had 30 stinking tornadoes. That is a huge day, so it didn't hit a Birmingham or an Atlanta or a Jackson or a Nashville or a Mobile or a Montgomery. I think that's part of it. People just expect to see death, doom, and destruction when they see these high risks. And, if the word is outbreak is used, Well, so it went out across a bunch of timberland where you got International Paper owns half a county and all these trees got knocked down. And I think it's just population bias. And people don't understand that. They just assume if tornadoes don't hit a big city, then it doesn't happen at all. And me, I'm very touchy about that subject. People that live in rural America are often discriminated against in so many different ways. And I think they are, journalists and sometimes in the weather community. But I think it's population bias is the big deal. I can have 50 tornadoes in a day down here. If you don't have any loss of life and they're out in the middle of nowhere, people think it's a bust. Nothing ever happened. You were wrong. They'll just, the haters will come out and just be hating big time.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you mentioned the media, because this is something I know that's one of Harold's favorite subjects. And we recently had tornadoes sort of in the Chicago suburbs, and it's a place where, again, not even a big tornado or a lot of tornadoes, but it garnered enough attention because of where it was that there was some media running stories on it. And Harold, what's been your impression of how well the media handles these terms, or even anything to do with tornado climatology at all? What's been your experience?
Well, I think that the biggest thing is probably when we look at tornadoes is that there are a couple of things. One is that tornadoes are rare events anywhere. I mean, that's the bottom line. And our ability to, I think things have changed with our ability to cover them, and our ability to broadcast pictures, James, I remember seeing the tower cam video at Tuscaloosa. You go back to 1990, I might have seen a video, a year later of that
maybe,
tornado.
yeah, maybe if you're lucky,
yeah. And I think that's and so we have this sort of, there's more of an immediacy feeling that we get, and that makes it seem like that. I think people get the impression that tornadoes are more frequent at locations than they really are, and the fact that they really are rare events, everywhere, and that we maybe spread their effect out over places. I think back to the May 3rd, 99 tornado. It's 10 miles away from my house. If there wasn't television covering, there's actually an excellent chance that 100 years ago, I might not have even known that tornado happened. I would have had no cause to go there. And when it did happen, I've watched it all that night. My wife ended up helping when they went back to one of the schools, helping just as a go down this hall because they had to go to a different building. And so I was really aware of what occurred, but I probably wouldn't have been long ago because it wouldn't have personally affected me. And so I think that's one of the conundrums we have is, you build awareness by saying this could happen, but that we tend to, we do things and we also then say, well, gee, this has never happened before. I'm dealing with that actually a little bit now with the tornado last week in the Czech Republic. Well, yeah, okay, it's probably the strongest tornado in the modern history of the Czech Republic, probably a couple hundred years. Well, but I can point you to a tornado in Austria that's 60 miles away that was pretty much the same event 100 years ago, and go into southern Poland and find you one recently, and into Germany and find you one that's recently. It's that small area. And in the US, our equivalent of doing it is a state or a city. This is the worst tornado in, eastern Tennessee. Well, that's a pretty small area. And if you expanded your definition out a little larger, well, yeah, it's a rare event everywhere. And eventually, you're going to get hit. We deal with that, the Moore versus Norman. Norman is immune to tornadoes, even though you look at a map and that's just not remotely true. And Moore gets hit all the time. And it's that same kind of a curious way we look at geography. I'll plug the geographers on the show.
Yeah, the geographers appreciate that. Well, I'll ask a quick, geography question. You brought up places like Europe that do experience tornadoes. do people in your paper, you said that you focused on the US, but Paulina, are there definitions for tornado outbreak that vary from those that we even use in other places in the world? How do other places that experience tornadoes think about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is exactly what the speakers touched upon, that the perception and the way how people see the world through the media may build some concept of what tornado outbreak is. And in terms of, especially, in Poland or in Europe, the big deal is all the Hollywood movies that are out there and also doing their own job in terms of the understanding of what outbreak might be. And this is maybe a little bit, well, I believe that those perceptions exist. However, what Harold mentioned about the Czech Republic is many people don't even realize the threat associated with the event of tornado. There was this videos, people were just standing outside and recorded some event, not really realizing that the very bad winds and the debris might hurt them. And I feel just because there's not so many of these events in so many regions in Europe, people might react to that it's really something strange, something different, something unknown, and are completely unprepared. So that's maybe touching upon another problem, perception, understanding versus preparedness to such events.
Yeah, I think that in Europe, one of the problems is the relatively small areas that they forecast for. And I remember very well the European Severe Storms Conference in 2002 in Prague, and a young woman from Slovenia came up and gave a talk, and this was her first talk in English. She was petrified. And so she asked me and Nikolai Docek, who's the founder of the European Severe Storms Lab, to go over her talk with her. And she's doing some modeling stuff, looking at the environments. And she shows this radar loop. And the thing she's focusing on is it's the most expensive hailstorm in the history of Slovenia. Damaged 3/4 of the cars in the city of Ljubljana. If you translate via the size of the economy, in the US, it would have been a $20 billion hailstorm. So she shows this radar loop. And Nikolai and I are going, oh my gosh, it's not even the best storm of the day. You've got 6 other supercells cruising across the radar, and they had no reports from any of them. And we told Matea, well, if you completely lose track of the English, just go to the end of the talk, show the radar loop, and stand and smile and point, and you'll have the best talk of the whole conference. But the amazing thing was, in the question time, the one of the Hungarians got up and says, hey, that was our biggest day of the year. It was the same day. It's a couple of countries away. One of the French meteorologists says, our big day was the day before. The Russians, our big day was the next day. And it was like all of a sudden it was if you follow the continental thing, which is they don't have the equivalent of the SPC that as a professional thing. There's some they're meteorologists, but it's not official. What they do is they're forecasting. You could actually watch that progression across the continent, and it would have raised a lot of awareness for the local weather services. If it was really bad in southern France and Italy yesterday, it's probably going to be bad in the Balkans today. And I think that was one of those things that the small postage stamp that they particularly focus on is a problem. Just as, for instance, if we had our 50 state weather services and no national coordinating system at all, people might go, oh, that was a huge day in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And nothing in Alabama. So,
I think it's so easy. I mean, the geopolitics of weather forecasting, but it really affects the science. It's easy to take it for granted when we have it so good. And we really, really do. The layers of just sharing that go on in the domestically here in the US. But Tell us a little bit more. I mean, it's really interesting. The European system, you think about, oh, it's probably really similar to ours, and you're fairly comparable in size. They have to have, the same kinds of capabilities we do. You always hear about the Western world, so-called Western world, Western countries, sort of are the tech leaders and everything else. But what have you found in working with European nations? My sense of it is they even have some countries for which the weather services are sort of private entities, and so the data sharing that is necessary to share things like reports to verify, that something actually is of concern, that doesn't happen. Even
Right.
in the states that are about the size of 2 Wisconsins, which is what Germany is, they
Yeah.
might not know what's going on, what happened in France, and then Poland might not know what happened in Germany, and that is a real problem for forecasters who are trying to look for especially extremely rare events.
I think the Europeans are probably ahead of us in 2 pan-European efforts. One is the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting.
Yeah.
And they partner with what are referred to as the member states. And they provide the background conditions for all the local models, and they're really good at what they do. The other that they're ahead of us in is their satellite service, EU METSAT. Again, it's the same model. There are the member states that contribute, do research. They share those data. They're behind us in radar. Because it's individual countries that will do the radar. There is some cooperation, particularly the Central European, sort of Germany, Switzerland, Austria, the Czech Republic do a lot of data sharing. Well, a lot of the rest of it is individual countries, and so you don't, and it's just the fact that we have I tell people that it's not the NextRad radars that are really the important thing. It's the NextRad network. I mean, I sit here and I think on my phone, I can pull up, if there's an interesting radar event going, I pull it up. I mean, I almost missed the Norman hailstorm because I was watching the San Antonio hailstorm.
Yeah.
And those kinds of things. The fact that we can look at all those things, and we have the same technology everywhere. And in Europe, it's like, well, it's a different company. You can't even download the data in real time in the same way in Europe. And that's been, I think, one of their big limitations. There are some efforts to help in that. We've pushed and we've tried to make some progress on getting a European Storm Prediction Center, and there's always a fear from the nations that they're going to lose their sovereignty over their forecasting, lose their best forecasters. We'd like to go with the ECMWF model, which is there's a small permanent staff, and then member states send people, and they're there for a couple of years, and then they go back, and so we can start to communicate well between those different places. There is some pan-European training. I'll mention that later on in the evening. And there is some stuff with data with a reporting database, but not all of the countries. A lot of it depends on what we might call amateurs, even though they're actual meteorologists, but they're not paid to collect the data, but they can put the reports into the database. And that's a pretty good interface. And we're slowly but surely learning more about things that happen in other places. But it's just, Poland, the number of severe weather reports that we had until probably 20 years ago in the country was close to zero. It just wasn't. There was no system to collect the reports. And that's one of the things in the U.S. It's like, okay, if you see a tornado, you call your local law enforcement, emergency manager. It gets to the weather service. It gets into the database. We do those things very, very well. And it just isn't true in Europe in a lot of places. And it's been a big hindrance. But we're doing some forecasting workshops that go on that are really good to have. But yeah.
Carol, I've got a question that, and I dropped off because of a computer problem a second ago. But let's say we have a line of storms that's coming out of maybe Belgium or the Netherlands and over the border into Western Germany. Do these countries issue the type of warnings that we see? in their neck of the woods?
The Germans do.
Okay.
Deutsche Wetterdienst started doing that several years ago. A lot of that came out of this. There was this wonderful time of young people getting interested in severe weather around 2000, and in the year 2000 and 2001, we had two big visitors to Norman. One was Nikolai Dotzek, and he went back and basically did the work to make the European Severe Storms Laboratory, which is not a real big physical space. It's more of a virtual space. And one of their big things was setting up the severe weather database that they put together. The other was Johannes Dahl, who is now a professor at Texas Tech. Johannes at the time had just finished his undergraduate at Berlin, and he came over and he organized a group of what originally were 5 students, and they did European convective outlooks model in the SPC outlooks. It's called ESTOFEX, ESTOFEX.org. And it's had more people come on to it. Mateusz, that Paulina mentioned, is one of the forecasters now. They don't do the forecast every day because they don't get paid to do it. And if it's, and in the early days when they were all students, it was real easy. And then when they started getting jobs and having families, sometimes it was hit or miss as to whether we could get a forecast out today. But for instance, they had what would be the equivalent of high risk out for the event that included the Czech tornado last week. And it was they were focused much more on the hail, and there was 3+ inch hail that fell in Poland that day, and that was their primary what they were looking at. But the only country that really does warnings like that, the Germans have a lot of things like we do. The Austrians a little bit, the Dutch a little bit. The French don't. No, the French don't do very much. I mean, the French. I think if we got Meteo France to go along with the pan-European plans, everything else would fall in place. Because if you get Meteo France and Deutsche Wetterdienst together, the rest of the countries go along. That's, I think, the message. But unfortunately, when DWD is in favor of something, Meteo France tends to be reluctant. And the countries are they're little sort of connectors that the smaller countries that can't afford to do their own limited area modeling will partner with one of the larger countries. So like the Czech Republic and Slovenia, I know for certain use the French limited area model. There's the French limited area model, the Germans, and the Dutch, and the UK. Those are the 4 big limited area models, and the other countries all use one of them, and partner with them, do some research, do some case studies, and all that. I mean, we have a real. I mean, the issue actually, if there's no place that shows the issue better, it's Italy. There is no Italian National Weather Service. There are a bunch of regional weather services. The one in the Northeast, the Friuli, Venezia Giulia region, so Venice and around over to Trieste, is really severe weather aware. They've got the Po Valley. They get lots of big time storms there. You go to some of the other regions, and severe thunderstorms just are. They don't even think about it.
That is so interesting. It is just the things you take for granted, right? And if you've ever traveled to Europe, you probably have had this sense of, something's missing from my consciousness, and weather. I think that's what it is. And you don't even realize how much your environment is permeated by information about it until you go someplace where the culture is just different, and the information streams that support knowledge about weather, you can't take it for granted. So especially when you're talking about forecasting rare events, when you have segmented weather services like this, no forecaster is likely to get a lot of skill in forecasting these things, because they might see them one in their career or a handful, and that's it. And I see a real value then in what you're talking about, trying to nationalize a bit of this forecasting. But there's a lot of, I think you've highlighted it, there's some underlying geopolitics there that's not just about weather, but
it's
bigger EU issues too.
I will say this, that I think that there some of the issues still remain, but in general, the younger generation, it isn't quite as bad. That at least for severe storms. And I think a lot of it, the European Conference on Severe Storms, we started it in 2000. And, I've watched, I've got friends that, I've been to those conferences for 20 years with them now. They were young people when it started. I mean, there were a bunch of them that literally were just finishing their educational careers. And they came to that either the 2000 or 2002 conference at the very beginning. And they're now mid-career. And they they recognize, I don't get much in my little postage stamp, but we get a bunch in the continent. I mean, there's 300 tornadoes a year we estimate in Europe.
Wow, that's
not there's
negligible.
300 tornadoes a year. Yeah, but Europe's actually not that small of a place.
Yeah.
But then when you look at that, that means that the Czech Republic averages about 3 a year. Well, that's about their share. Maybe you might think might be 5, but that's still you don't expect that. And if you think about what a forecaster goes through, they aren't going to see very much.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just and you talk about, and James, you talk about the population bias. Well, if it's not near Prague, well, really, do we care that much? Maybe, Bruno, but the rest of the country, that's just the other, that's out there.
Yeah.
And we all suffer from that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to to not have that occur, but it's over there. That means that event has to be really local. I mean, there was this tornado appears it's going to ended up getting rated as an F4. The last F3 was May 31st, 2001. And so but that's kind of the frequency you'd expect given the number of tornadoes they get.
Yep. I think, Harold, one thing that I noticed, because I spent some time in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands, is their whole weather hazard system is color coded. I think they have different, they go from, I think, orange or yellow, orange, red, or something like that. I mean, to the hazard that ranges everything from winter weather to severe thunderstorms and even lightning. They do, I think they do some stuff with lightning as well. So it's interesting to kind of look at what these other countries do. I find it fascinating. Yeah.
I think Meteo Alarm has some interesting ways to approach doing the thing I think we've at least looked at it with the Hazard Simplification Project.
Mm-hmm.
But you also look at response issues. I was watching one of the group matches from the European Cup last week, and you can hear thunder on the TV, and you can barely see across the field in the rain. And there's not even a thought that we're going to stop. And then this is also one of my favorite sporting events of the year, the Tour de France.
Yep.
You think about a nightmare forecasting scenario. Let's have people on bicycles, on their bikes for 6 hours a day. And if you want to be a spectator, you got to show up, hours before the thing starts. You get all these people outside. And today I was looking at the it's really dark cloud over there on the broadcast, and I'm looking at one of those convective outlooks and I'm going, well, yeah, we might have some thunder that might make this last little bit of the race incredibly interesting. They had to stop one a couple of years ago for a large hailstorm that washed out the side of a mountain onto the road. And then you've got now 10,000 people, spectators and bike riders, up here on the wrong side of this. And how do we get people away? There was a tunnel, and they had all the bike riders just go in the tunnel to get out of the hail.
Well, this sounds like, I mean, come on, listen, Harold, you're too young for this. Everybody else, it's just James and my deal here. I mean,
exactly.
The days that we watched Alabama or Texas A&M play back in the 80s, and Harold, a thunderstorm came overhead, and you just played that much harder. We didn't worry about that lightning striking a quarter mile away.
My state, I have a memory of my junior year in high school, state track meet. I was an alternate but it was for the first event of the day, so I was actually warming up to be ready, and I felt a little bit of a tingle when the lightning hit the bleachers. And yes, 10 minutes later, with it still raining, we started that race, and I didn't even think about it. I did, and you look back and go, I'm alive. I should really be thankful for the fact that I survived that day in Rolla.
Yeah.
That's a really good show title. I'm really grateful. Really grateful that I survived that day in Rolla.
Yeah.
I look back on the 1983 Iron Bowl, Alabama versus Auburn, Legion Field. We had a rotating wall cloud, supercell storm, tornado warning, hundreds of ground strokes. Never stopped the game. Never. No. Just kept on playing. Yeah. Well, remember Keith Jackson. I've never seen a storm like this in my life. I mean, it's like
play on.
I was actually writing a chapter of my dissertation during the Hugo game.
Yeah.
Where was that? Was that?
I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, where it's blowing. Basically, you've got a rain band blowing one into the field to the other, and you couldn't. If you punted the ball going one direction, you got an 80-yard punt. If you just kicked the ball straight up in the air, and the teams going the other direction literally wouldn't punt because the ball was going to go back behind the punter if he actually kicked the ball. It was a absolutely wacko game to watch, and we wouldn't let that happen again.
And it's pretty amazing. I sat yesterday at the Austin FC. I'm working with them in the EOC and the command center, like Kevin does up at OU, and Eric does out at Texas Tech, and yesterday we sat there and we had some lightning out at about 10 miles northwest, and we didn't ever take any action because it was moving away. It never did get within the 10-mile radius. But in a way, I think we should be proud of what we've done in this country in a lot of ways. Not that I'm involved in it, but at the same time, I think we've come a long way in the way we look at this, because I'm serious. I remember I think a Texas A&M James and Baylor game one time. You couldn't see. It's like Harold said, you couldn't see across the field, and the lightning was flashing, and everybody's just playing in the floodwaters. So,
we've come a long way, but I could just see, Texas Embassy, Kevin's head exploding for all of these events. Back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, he'd have to duct tape his head if he watched the replays of these games on television. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I've got Kevin for one now on the September 27th, 1927 tornado in St. Louis. The fact that it rained overnight meant that they had called off the Browns game that was supposed to be played that afternoon, the St. Louis Browns. The tornado hit the stadium at about the time they would have been playing, took the flagpole down into center field, took out most of the right field pavilion. There's a pile of rubble on Grand Avenue outside of the stadium. Okay, this is like 2 days to go in the season, and the Browns are in 7th place, and they're supposed to be playing the Indians, who are in 8th place. They played a doubleheader the next day with an attendance of 200 people because the streetcars weren't running because of the rubble. And they played that game when they had basically covered over the fallen over grandstand, and we went ahead and played the game. They moved the flagpole up against the wall, and the Cardinals were one game out of first place. They would have hosted the first game of the World Series the next week if they would have actually won the pennant. And I was going, they played when you basically had to walk past the debris, and this is and the blocks just west of the stadium where most of the fatalities were. I can't imagine we're playing baseball in an absolutely meaningless game in those conditions, but
play on. So this is a little known fact, I think, for our listening audience, but Harold, while he's known for the things he does in weather, I'm not surprised this has turned to sports brains from WeatherBrains, because Harold, what was your first publication actually in? Paulina talked about how she's a musician, and that's not something that we see come by our field very often. We have a lot of talents, but musical talent isn't always what we're all blessed with. Harold, where did you come to us from, or what were your early interests?
Well, I was physics and math as formerly in archaeology and anthropology when I was at Cambridge. But my first formal peer-reviewed publication is an analysis of the Elias Sports Bureau's definition of clutch hitters, published in the Baseball Research Journal in 1987 or 88. That was my first publication. My second thing that I didn't get formally published that I wish I would have, but it's just like my professional career, was an analysis of performance in September by players playing every day. And that was that one I'm known for in way too wide of circles. But yeah, you can look up playing every day in September rest or something like that. It's online somewhere.
Yeah. Well,
Kim, can I go down a rat hole here?
Oh, please! This whole thing is at this point we're off the rails on a crazy train.
Yeah. So is this a different rat hole than the one we've been going?
Yeah, totally different rat hole here. So this whole POD versus FAR thing, it's been getting a lot of play here lately. The big USA Today piece ran and all these op-eds and. What's I don't know what started all this, but Harold, just speak to that whole issue, the POD versus the FAR, and where are we now in the warning process with that?
Okay, well, it turns out there's some the notion of decision making under uncertainty is pretty well studied in a lot of fields, and there was a model developed back starting in the late 1930s, 1940s, to explain it, that was actually looking at detection of signals by radar, but was also used if you're looking at your radar, is that blob a real thing, or is that what we might call ground clutter now, or is that an approaching enemy aircraft? Those kinds of questions that they were interested in the 1940s, and then as we started to listen to radio signals from people we didn't necessarily like very much and trying to pick out what they were saying, that it turns out that there's a really simple model that looks at the trade-off between probability detection and false alarm ratio decision. The signal detection theory provides a really nice way to look at it, and can see that tornado warnings, the system, I don't know about any individual decisions, but the system can be described really, really well. And it turns out that with where our current science is, our ability to discriminate between tornadic and non-tornadic storms, we've got two things in the decision process. One, can we tell the difference between a tornadic storm and a non-tornadic storm? And the other is, what's the weight of evidence that we need? So basically, how many missed events are we willing to live with compared to how many false alarms we have? And right now we're at a point where for every point of false alarm rate that we drop things, we drop the POD by about 3 points. And in 2012, Central Region in first, and then Southern Region starting in 2013, started putting a greater emphasis on false alarms for their forecasters, and we start to see a change that our ability to discriminate between a tornadic storm and a non-tornadic storm, that the science part of that didn't seem to change, but the decision threshold changed. And we had a drop of 3 or 4 points in false alarm, but a drop of about 12, 14 points in POD. Now, the interesting thing about that is that for the change was such that if we think about it, that once every 3 years we would miss on EF3 or stronger, and in exchange we have 100 fewer false alarms each year across the country. I don't actually know how to weight that trade-off, but that's in effect the trade-off that the system did. And I think you can make arguments that 100 fewer false alarms is is in general a good thing. I mean, the only way you get the POD and the FAR to both improve, you just got to get better. Well, and that's a slow process. But if you want to improve one or the other, you're going to do it at the cost of the other thing. And we don't really have a good estimate of the costs of misdetections and false alarms to actually adequately describe that. In effect, that the change of emphasis, the way that the system looks when you look at the data before and after, it looks like that we value false alarms twice as much as we used to. We think the cost of a false alarm is twice as what, or I'm sorry, 50% more than what it was prior to 2012. It looks a lot like what we used to think it looked like in the early 1990s. In reality, that the costs we just weren't as good back in the early 1990s. So we missed a whole lot more events because we didn't know as much then.
Yeah.
But we don't. We kind of do. We just do things. We make changes, and we don't really have necessarily a clear goal as to how we should make the changes and why we should make the changes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really interesting human psychology angle to this, where I think we've sort of intuited rightly that people are more upset when something bad happens and they aren't warned than when there's a warning and nothing bad happens. So it's what's called the asymmetric penalty function. So we know that at least, sort of generally speaking, one of these things is worse. And there's a reason why we erred on the side of caution and had sort of a higher false alarm ratio, so that we knew we could assure that we'd catch most of the events. I mean, you look no further than just the various kinds of catastrophes that have occurred in the past week in our country. Even, think about the building collapse in Florida. I think one of the reasons why that is so jarring for people is that idea of there was no warning. And you would so much rather have had that engineering report come out and have people have to evacuate, perhaps needlessly, have 100 buildings like that one that get evacuated to save those people from that one that did collapse. And, as a society, when we look at catastrophic risk, especially, we want to have control. And that's the psychology of it. When it's uncontrollable, which is what unwarned situations are, then we really, really don't like those. So I think that we've kind of intuited a bit the right general tendency. Putting an exact number on it is a really, really tough thing. So the kinds of things, Harold, you were talking about, is that a good or bad thing? Very hard to say.
Right.
That's what you do, Kim. That's Kim's job. You the social scientists have to figure that out.
Yeah, this in general, this problem comes up in all kinds of things. Something is, just like your white blood cell count. If you go in complaining of lower right abdominal pain, do we think you have appendicitis or not? Well, we take your white blood cell count, and if it's really elevated, there's a good chance you do. And so we'll just take that out. And if you have a really low white blood cell count or not elevated, you're probably okay. So we do that. The credit card fraud detection is the exact same problem.
Yeah.
If you think about it, they could call you on every single purchase you make and go, is that really you making the purchase? And about the 20th time they call you, you're going to go, well, forget this. I don't want to deal with having to double check everything I do. But at the other hand, you also don't want them to go, I got called one time because apparently I was trying to buy 20,000 gallons of gasoline in Kazakhstan. And the credit card company thought that was probably not me. And I said, thank you. And we were already sending you the new card, kind of thing. But that they have that same kind of a problem of they how often do we call you to tell you we think there might be a problem before you get annoyed?
Yeah.
So where do we stand nationally? And to me, just looking at this whole thing, every local office has a different culture, and they just have a different mindset when it comes to FAR versus POD. But across the Weather Service, Harold, where do we stand with that now?
Well, if you look at warnings that are issued prior to the tornado occurrence, some of the official definitions really muddy the waters on how this is called. But if you just say we warned before the tornado occurs, our probability detection's a little over 50% now. Now it's well over 95% for strong and violent
for the big ones, right?
For the big ones, yeah. I think F3 and greater are like 85%.
Okay.
Our false alarm ratio is right about 70%, which is historically low. I mean, it's one of the things, because it's a rare event and we believe there's an asymmetric penalty. Moving the false alarm ratio a lot is a very, very difficult problem to do, unless we get a lot smarter or we're willing to completely tank the POD. I mean, if we wanted the false alarm ratio, I had a friend years ago who said our false alarm ratio shouldn't, with our current science, shouldn't be more than 25%. And I knew that was, I knew that was nonsense. This is how I actually got into doing the signal detection theory stuff. Turns out if you get the FAR down to 25%, your POD is probably going to be about 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
And that's clear. I don't think anybody likes that idea. But the FAR just doesn't move very much because it's a rare event and it's hard to forecast.
And do we have the skill set to issue a tornado warning for an EF0 tornado and a QLCS that lasts for 2 minutes? Do we even try to do that and hit that button every time? Hit warning, warning, or do you just use a severe thunderstorm warning with a tornado as possible line in it?
Well, now we're talking policy, and I'm supposed to stay out of that.
No. We're just talking between us here. I mean,
no one's watching at all.
Nobody.
I think my wife is. So that's no. I think the question is, yes, we can issue one for all of them, but the false alarm cost will be very high. Now, the real question on the TOR possibles. The use of TOR possible under a severe, to me, comes down to, what do I do differently when you've said TOR possible? Because by not putting out a tornado warning, you told me, well, you don't really think there's going to be a tornado. You've just done this TOR possible. And the false alarm ratio for TOR possibles, it turns out it's close to 90%. Wow. And and that's roughly the false alarm ratio you would get from warning all the time, putting out a tornado warning all the time instead of severe thunderstorm warnings. And so that's actually the real question. I'm not sure what I don't know as a when I put on my user of warnings hat, as occasionally I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do differently about a TOR possible and a severe thunderstorm warning, as opposed to no TOR possible. Given the fact that I know tornado warnings exist. And you apparently didn't think it was a big enough deal to go all the way to a tornado warning. It's a really hard. We introduced that without really thinking about what does it mean and how to get and how to what do we want that to do. Yeah.
And I've got to throw out Troy's comment about severe thunderstorm warnings. Where do we stand with those? Like again, I'm a user and I hear a severe thunderstorm warning. What am I supposed to do with that? What do I need to do? And do people react to those things? Or do we have too many warnings, Troy?
Yeah. And I've always said that, and I respect Harold. I mean, do we, Harold? We remember a number of years back when we stepped up from 3/4 inch hail up to 1 inch hail for severe, and the whole thing was to try to reduce the number of warnings. And I guess my question in 2021, did that work?
It reduced the number of warnings. Did it actually reduce them by enough to count? I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that the severe thunderstorm warning problem is in a lot of ways a lot bigger than the tornado warning problem. Yeah. In that we really don't know what to do. I mean, for me, I live in what would be referred to as a reasonably well-built house. I got a new impact resistant roof up here. And so, as long as I stay away from windows,
yeah,
most severe thunderstorms aren't going to really do a whole lot to me unless the pecan tree goes, but there are some, when you start to tell me that, the hail that's going to hit Kim's roof is going to hit my roof, or it's going to be, enough that's going to take down most of the trees on my block. Well, now I care a lot. And I don't really know if I don't know if we've thought very much about the goal of the severe thunderstorm program, because there's a lot of storms that are consequential that aren't severe. That are still, I mean, if you put at the right time of year and the right crop, you put a bunch of 3/4 inch hail in, half-inch hail, that's an absolutely devastating event for that crop, but it's not severe. And the fact that flash flooding rainfall isn't severe. I think we're the only country that defines severe weather that doesn't include severe thunderstorms, that doesn't include rain rate as one of the criteria.
And then and then we hear of an air mass thunderstorm that produces a lightning strike that kills 3 people, and that's not part of it. And the Weather Service really doesn't have that much to do with lightning, to be honest with you.
I think what's our goal of the system is, in one sense. I mean, when you think back historically, and again, Troy, you brought it up earlier, James may be the only person who remembers this. When we started doing things, we just started doing them because we could.
Yeah.
And we weren't really, I don't think we were really thinking very much about, other than people saying, if people are going to panic if we say tornado, I don't think people were actually thinking about a response system. And now we've got so much history, baked into it. Even if you dreamed up the perfect new warning system, we lose a lot of people's memory of how the current system works. I think my dad will turn 94 this weekend. He's been around, tornado warnings for a really, really long time. And I think he has sort of an intuitive feeling for what that means. If we start changing things, how does that change his response?
Yeah. So I bring this up because James's head will explode at this point, and
I'm here for that. I'm wrapping duct tape around it now.
But one thing that I find interesting in this discussion, and we kind of touched on a little bit, I guess, and Kim, we've had this discussion as well, and that's the media so many times that is very well. I believe the media is trying to do their best, but when they come out and say there was no warning for this storm, and I can show you the TOR, or I can show you the severe thunderstorm warning, there was a warning, and you see that in the media. To me, and people believe it. You can sit there and tell them, hey, there's the warning. They say, oh no, the media said there was no warning. And that really bugs me.
I'll agree with you, but I will say one thing.
Okay.
This comes back again to the fact that if the people on this screen hear the word warning, there's a technical definition that comes in.
Yeah.
And we're familiar with it. And that this comes back to sort of like, how do we define an outbreak?
Yeah.
There may be a lot of people who their internal definition of warning doesn't match the official definition. This is actually one of our problems with evaluating the Weather Service warning process, is we have official definitions. It isn't clear that they match, that the metrics we use match anybody's useful measures. When their value functions.
We're sitting here looking at the warning, advisory, and watch system, and the public, I don't know what the percentage is, but they don't understand what a watch, an advisory, or a warning happens to be, and that's what I think really kind of scares me is.
Yeah, I just put a little note into chat. I'll make my comment on the air. What about a 2% tornado probability isn't relatable, Harold and Paulina? I mean, when you're thinking about trying to communicate these threats, the way we have designed our systems, they're scientifically rigorous and they're definitions you can come to know. It does become a really interesting challenge to think about what if we were to change. What do you want to even approach that change process? How much better would things be with an alternate system? And is it worth going through that loss, that you're talking about, of the adaptation we have? How do you know what's best?
That's actually the big thing, is that I don't really know how to measure the things. We are talking about trying to do some experiments that will go back and look at every tornado day ever, and we essentially can know the underlying occurrence for any day of the year, any location of the country, the probability over a 60-year period of tornadoes occurring. We can then take individual days and we can say, well, how rare was this day? Was the real threat on this day 100 times the average? And how big of an area was that, or some other threshold number? We're going to try to do some experiments where we actually look at that, and maybe look at if we express the forecast as probably both an absolute percentage and then a relative risk compared to the average conditions. Would people use that differently? We hear a lot from particularly our media friends in the Northeast. Slight risk is end of the world kind of stuff, because they don't get very many events each year. And so for them, slight risk is high risk. And so how can we actually communicate for something like, the tornadoes that we had happen in Massachusetts back in 2011. One of the forgotten days of 2011 was June 1st, 2011. And there are 3 tornadoes. One of them was an F3 in Massachusetts. That's a generational event for them. And it's a slight risk that verified very nicely. Could we actually tell people, yeah, this is the biggest event you're gonna have happen in your area for the next 30 years, probably. You should really take all the precautions you can. So we're going to try to do some experiments to see how people respond differently to those different ways of looking at the products. And I don't know what if anything will come out of it. We'll probably, like as we've done before, we'll try to bring in media partners and emergency managers and members of the public to actually respond and see how they deal with those things and see if they interpret them in more positive ways that might give the option then, so that the Oklahoma weather guy might say, hey, it's high risk today, do your thing. And the Boston guy might say it's 100 times more likely than normal today. Take your precautions. So I think that's one of the real challenges, though, is trying to figure out, is there anything we can do that doesn't break what we have now? Because in reality, the system isn't terrible now. And so you don't want to throw it in.
Yeah, we got to take a time out real quick. And let me just warn Paulina and Harold, we are going to do picks of the week. We'll do a weather roundup. Got to talk about the heat in the Pacific Northwest and all that kind of good stuff. But anyway, we're going to pause for Tony Rice and Jen's This Week in Tornado History. We'll be right back as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
The Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a report last week on unidentified aerial phenomenon, which is military speak for UFOs. The report's only 9 pages long and is worth a read. The most important takeaway is right there in the title. These events were and remain unexplained. But that doesn't mean that these objects were alien in origin. It just means there's not enough data to definitively say what they were. The report even points out that incidents with sufficient data most often turn out to be birds or balloons or drones or even plastic bags. Atmospheric phenomena such as ice crystals and thermal fluctuations that can register on some infrared and radar systems. They can also be classified technologies being developed by foreign adversaries or even the US government itself. These things are on a need-to-know basis, after all, and not all pilots out on training exercises need to know. I was a little disappointed that the hands-down most misidentified UFO thing in the sky didn't even get a mention: the planet Venus. You see, Venus is the 3rd brightest object in the sky, behind the sun and the moon. It's so bright that it can even be visible in the daytime sky. It's also the hands-down top answer to what is that thing in the sky questions, even when it doesn't seem to be at first. Case in point, a broadcast met in Indiana reached out to me last week with a particularly good example. A viewer had reported seeing a bright light low in the northwestern sky. It's Venus, right? But wait. They went on to explain that over the next 60 to 90 minutes, that light moved. Still a single light, still in the same general area, but clearly in a different location. Well, that's not how planets work. Turns out they were looking shortly after sunset, and were seeing Venus, shining very brightly through the civil's twilight. When they looked again an hour or so later, Venus had set, and they were now seeing Mars. It was there all along, up and to the left of Venus, but at somewhere around 170 times dimmer. Mars wasn't actually visible until well after sunset. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me in RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, it is the deadliest Independence Day tornado on record and one of the deadliest in North Dakota's modern history. The Elgin, North Dakota F4 tornado of July 4th, 1978. The tornado caused extensive damage in this small town, and there were 5 fatalities. Per Thomas Grzoulis, in significant tornadoes, there were approximately 45 homes or trailers that were damaged or destroyed. The storm data entry mentions that the tornado did skip. It had a path length of 26 miles. It traveled for over an hour, slowly through Grant County. Grzoulis mentions that 17 blocks were hit in Elgin. 2 of the deaths were in a pickup truck, and 2 deaths were in a car, pieces of which were found a mile away from the road. 1 death was in a recreational vehicle. The town's water tower was completely demolished. In an article from the Bismarck Tribune from July 6, 1978, it reports that 5 kids escaped serious injury by huddling under a basement table under their home. You can read about this event and hundreds more on our website at tornadotalk.com. All right. James had to go. So, Kim, I don't know if folks want to do what weather roundup real quick or picks of the week. What do we want to do?
Go ahead and start with the roundup.
I've never done, weather
Right?
roundup.
Yeah.
I've
Well,
never led this before. I just butted in all of a sudden.
Right. I know. Hi, welcome to leadership. Yeah, you can, it's the best way to do it. Just off the cuff by firing squad. So I think it'd be really lovely for us to just do a roundtable chat about the weather going on. I mean, the extremes are incredible. And we'd be remiss to have a WeatherBrains where we didn't talk about what's going on. So I mean, there's nothing really of note going on here in Oklahoma, except that we are on the downside of there's this enormous ridging in the Pacific Northwest causing all of the heat, and we're just getting wave after wave of precipitation, and it's lovely. I'm not going to complain. Oh, Troy, are you trying to comment? You're I think you're muted.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that y'all have flash flooding. You've had flash flooding up there. You and Harold, you've got flash flooding in the north, up in the Oklahoma City area, and we're sitting, that ridge up there. One thing you can pretty much guess is when temperatures get above average out in the west, and particularly in the northwest and the central U.S., things this time of year are simply going to become more unstable, maybe because of the northwest flow. But basically, we've been around Austin, upper 80s, lower 90s. I was looking at the month of June in Austin. At Bergstrom, we're 2 degrees below average through yesterday. And Camp Mabry, which is the inner city site, and I'm looking to see about 0.7 of a degree above average. But folks, this is not what we're used to seeing. And if you even go out and look at what the people at CPC have put out today, Climate Prediction Center, Central Plains still continues to say below average temperatures and above normal precipitation all the way out through the 8 to 14 day period in their outlook. So it's interesting. And my pick of the week is the heat in the Northwest. I just got something that to me is personal because I've been out there before, and I'll save that for my pick of the week. But the heat out there, just amazing. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But for us, at least a little bit of relief in our part of the country, midsummer rains.
Yeah.
We had
go ahead.
Yeah, we had 2 consecutive days in Oklahoma City with more than 2 inches.
Yeah.
And that's 14 times on the 130-year record. We've had that many days in a row. We've had 2 days in a row, and the first time in about a decade. And that's just I think both times it was there, but we had that amount by 9 a.m.
Yeah. And
then it didn't rain the rest of the day. Come on, but yeah, my windows are open.
Yeah.
What's so sad? We've been talking on the show a little bit about compounding disasters because some of us have lived through at this point through the winter and early spring compounding disasters. But in Norman, we had the big hail event that shattered a lot of windows, broke a lot of roofs, but also shattered a lot of cars. I was driving around this weekend, and we had one of those big rain events that had driving rain with, or driving winds with it. And in driving around town, you see a lot of cars still that have sort of windows duct taped with, some plastic wrap and duct tape around it. But a good strong wind and some heavy driving rain will peel those things off. And car after car I saw, with their makeshift windows peeled away, and it was obvious that the rainwater had probably gotten in. And I just thought, we can't catch a break. No one here can catch a break for a single day. And it tells you a lot about, in disaster sciences, we talk about vulnerability as being in part just this, you're living in a state where you're always really close to disaster. You don't have a lot of capacity to adapt, and one thing goes wrong and everything is just from that point forward a pain. I think that you can see that now manifesting in the people of Norman in so many different corners of our community, where, and I know, Troy, you can completely sympathize with this too, with so many people living completely displaced lives. You don't have a lot of capacity to adapt to things that used to be minor inconveniences are now disasters.
My patience is about like this right now. It's and you see that in a lot of folks in Austin. You see how you can drive down the street, Kim, and everyone, you can drive down the street in Austin, and it's every other house that you see where the sheetrock has been ripped out. I'm way beyond that, but I'm serious. You see that in so many cases. I noticed it today. And I don't know. I think finally you just tire of it. Really, Kim, I think you just tire. You get exhausted from it. So.
Absolutely. Well, let's take some thoughts to a lighter place. Paulina, as we continue our weather roundup, I bet that you have some happy things to report. How's Hawaii doing? Are things at least good there? Yeah. There's not a volcano destroying a part of the island right now, is there?
Well, actually, the interesting thing is I am living in the caldera of a very, very, very old volcano. As it turns out, the whole beautiful mountains that are behind me, well, behind this window right now, is just a bridge of whatever is left of the volcano. And for me, it's just fascinating to look at this and think that millions of years ago there was actually lava flowing everywhere here. As of today, the sun is the weather is lovely, and we do have some clouds, but nothing really unusual here. So we are.
Have you had any coconuts fall recently?
Last week, yes.
Last week, okay.
Yeah.
We've been fortunate that our host here knows how to open them, because it's not as easy as it seems. And we had a very nice coconut milk, and we ate some of the coconut, so it was great.
That's pretty awesome.
And we had Tropical Storm Danny. Formed
and
is decreased all of a sudden, has now made a landfall. Right when we started the show, it made a landfall north of Hilton Head on Pritchard's Island, South Carolina. So latest, it's decreased already to a depression. Shocker on that one. So anyway, we got that going for us. It's hot here in Ohio, that's for sure. We're not getting the moisture yet. It's just been kind of just sultry, and we've had a pop-up or two, but it's been hot. But we're about to get the front, and things are about to get pretty wet here too. So
yeah. Let's talk about hot. Let's go to the pick of the week. And I've got to tell you this. I got this, and Harold, you're probably on this, and I think James is as well. But there's a map email group that went out, and just a little while ago, we got a note from one of the people that's a subscriber on that, talking about the heat in the Northwest, and particularly at Quileute Airport. And folks, if you've ever been out there, it's on a plateau and on the Olympic Peninsula out there, and it's probably no more than a mile or two from the Pacific Ocean up on the plateau. This afternoon, and I've been out there for a couple of upper air releases. I've gone out there and joined the people, and when they did that, I think they may be auto launched now. But today at 3:00 at Quileute Airport, and this is less than 2 miles off the Pacific, At 3 p.m. local time, they were 109 this afternoon, and that was with a northeast wind, fairly light. An hour later, the wind shifted to 180 degrees at 7 knots, and the temperature fell to 81.
Oh my gosh.
I mean,
Wow.
you look at this, and I mean, it's not the highest temperature we're going to see anywhere, 109. But for folks that have been out at Quileute and Rialto Beach and those places on the coast just west of there, this to me is just amazing.
Wow.
That you see that in an hour's time, a wind shift of, from the northeast into the south, and a drop of from 109 to 81.
Man.
And 81's warm for them.
Yeah, exactly. Harold,
Mm-hmm.
Quileute Airport, they're in the 50s and 60s most of the time with that flow, off the Pacific. And you're exactly right.
Yeah, they had never they'd never gotten to 100 before.
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I think their all-time record high at the station was 99.
Yeah,
and so they broke their record by
a
ridiculous amount.
That airport, if you ever get out there, I love the Olympic Peninsula. I love Claylock and those places out there. You ever get a chance to go out of Forks and go to the northwest a little bit, the Quileute, I think, it's Quileute Airport. Go out there sometime. It's really interesting, and largely, I believe it was an old military field at one point, but it's largely deserted now. There was a WSO, I think, out there at one time. But it's really fascinating area. Very, if you're looking for a McDonald's out in that area, you ain't gonna find it. Okay, this is a pretty quiet place out there on the Olympic Peninsula.
The other place with that it's been Lytton in British Columbia.
Yeah,
they got to 117.5 today.
Oh,
that's
British Columbia?
Yeah, Lytton. It broke the record for. It broke the Canadian record that was set yesterday at Lytton.
Wow.
And it's 50s, not out of the 50s Celsius, which would be 122, is not out of the question for them tomorrow. It's in the interior British Columbia. It's that's just not even.
No.
I doubt if there's anybody who's air conditioning in Lytton. And that's just not even conceivable what that's got to be like up there. It's also in a valley, and so it's a nice place that those valleys of the interior British Columbia, they actually grow a lot of wine grapes because it stays warm enough in the summertime overnight that they can grow them, but the valleys are really getting them killed right now with that.
And this is a place, Harold, that if you're thinking air conditioning,
not a chance.
There's no air conditioning up there. I cannot imagine.
No.
Of course, yeah.
That's just not even that was and apparently there was also sometime last week there was a place in Siberia north of the Arctic Circle that got above 100.
Wow.
Above 100 degrees north of the Arctic Circle.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, that's an ugly thought.
Yep.
Wow, and we're not even to July. So,
yeah, how about
people
that?
with climatological inclinations, how concerning is this kind of event?
Well, I mean, in some sense, it's very concerning. Now, this is okay. Just to be, the peak temperature in the Pacific Northwest tends to be in June.
Oh, okay.
So we're at least not getting off of getting too far off of that. But yeah, I mean, this is one of those events. It's hard to estimate how off the scale it is, because it's you occasionally see the individual station that has the weird thing happen because we just had the right kind of flow and all the other stuff. But this is over such a ridiculously huge area. When what they're only of the 50 largest cities in the United States now. Only 2 of them have had a higher temperature than Portland, Oregon. Yeah, Las Vegas and Phoenix are the only 2 large cities that have had a temperature higher than Portland had today. And it's supposed to be warmer tomorrow in Portland.
Yeah.
And that's
Texas. Wow.
Yeah, that's the thing is this is just like, when you get to 100 and what they got to 113, 114 today. That's tough to deal with any place.
Yeah.
I I've been trying to just put myself in the shoes of the people of Oregon. When I was a science fellow with the AAAS, I worked for a senator from Oregon, and so I got to know the state fairly well. And water resource issues were one of my areas that I did work in. And so I looked at things like how the Army Corps of Engineers makes decisions about water management in dam spillage. And, they have extraordinary measures they take to do things like manage the temperature of the water and the distribution of the temperature of water through the column, because they're trying to foster, the cultivation of fish. They're endangered species, but they're also commercially extreme and culturally extremely important out there. And I've just been trying to think, gosh, they had less water to deal with, going through the system because the snowpack was lighter this past winter. And so they're starting from a bad place anyway. And when you have this kind of heat on top of it, I expect the ecosystem impacts to this to be, potentially catastrophic. You could think about if you had just 117 degrees for a day, that's a far different thing from having several days in a row of this, which Troy, you can speak to that. I feel like you guys went through the opposite side of this coin in Texas in February, where you had a population that's not adapted to cold go through several days of extraordinary cold that you were not accustomed to. And now we have this happening on, sort of the other side of the country with heat. And, all together, you just get this sense of there are an extraordinary number of people who are writing incredible survival stories right now. I mean, the amount of human suffering is almost hard to probably fathom.
Yeah. Well, one of my former postdoc, who you know well, out in Seattle, has a 2-story townhouse, which is unair conditioned. She does have one of those little portable ones you can cool one room. So she's cooling one room. She's closed off the second floor of the townhouse because it was at close to 100, and she's keeping the one room. When I heard from her on Sunday, she was keeping the one room at 76, but that the rest of the lower part of the house was at 89, and that was before it got hot. Because it was. And then a friend is a massage therapist who went out to work at the track and field qualifiers for the Olympics, and he had sent out a message yesterday morning that it was 90 something degrees at 9 a.m. The track temperature was 115, and all they were doing was soaking towels in ice water. And they've ended up they've changed the timing of a lot of the running events because the track temperature yesterday afternoon at Eugene got to 150 degrees on the track surface. Yeah, and that's you can't physically, your feet burn, especially given when you're a track athlete, those shoes are really thin that they're wearing. And so they had to change all kinds of things about the schedule and all that, and the dorm they put him up in at the university was unair conditioned. And he said the first week he was out there, the box fan did okay, but he says the last few days had been pretty awful to be in. So yeah, that's the big story of at least for us. Yeah.
How long is it supposed to go on? When does it end for them? Because sometimes these, sort of oppressive events that are associated with just a high pressure system that is parked, they can last for a while. I haven't seen the forecast, but do you know if there's an end in sight for these folks? As everyone looks up, what is this going to end?
Everyone's looking at the forecast. Yeah.
I'm looking at that 8 to 14 day outlook from CPC today that continues to show, Kim, for us and Harold and those in the central part of the country, still this abnormally, and it's probably more due to cloud cover and precipitation and above average precipitation, below average temperatures through the 8 to 14 day period, which means there's some going on out there.
Yeah, that seems to be a signal that we're sort of in a not very progressive pattern that would favor them staying in this ridging.
Well, Yeah, Portland's forecast for tomorrow, it starts to get a little nicer.
What, the 90s? Like what is
Portland's
nicer is not still nice.
Yeah, well, Portland's high temperature tomorrow is their forecast is 92.
Okay.
They're currently 99. But I guess it's going to move a little bit east, and so we've got one more big day at Lytton to see if they can get to see if they can break the Canadian record again. And I think Seattle's still really hot for at least one more day. But I mean, 92 when it's still really hot for out there, and I think any of us who've been through big heat waves, one of the big things is the fact that it's not cooling off at night.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It'll take a long time to get those structures to cool. Once they've gotten that hot for a long time, and you don't have air conditioning, when you're only getting down to 70 at night, it still isn't going to cool off real fast in your structure.
True. Oh.
It does look like it heads east because I do stations in Montana. And so it's the Polson area and down toward Missoula. So they're going to start heating up quite a bit. And that actually lingers into the weekend. Yeah. And like northern Idaho, that area. So they start to see the temperatures between 105 to 110 for the rest of the week.
So I think the forecast for Boise is about the same thing, that they were going for highs above 100 for the next few days anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Summer's upon us, and in the West, it doesn't look very pretty.
No.
Hopefully this doesn't portend another awful year for them to come with fires, but I'm sure that's what all of the population of the Western
how much would you like
about.
to bet on? That just seems unlikely that it's not going to be a real. I mean, it's already been a pretty bad fire season.
That's true. So. Yep. Well, our thoughts go to everyone in all of the areas affected, which is it's just a huge swath of. We spend a lot of. It's so interesting how things like tornadoes can get such get our sense of risk. Really going, our hearts pumping, and it's really interesting to talk about. And events like this, they are responsible for the lion's share of weather fatalities in our country each year. So I'm glad that we're talking about it and bringing some light to what's happening. And I have a feeling that as the summer goes on, we'll be doing this more and more. Just we'll keep our fingers crossed that we won't, but we'll be here if it does. So Jen, passing the baton back to you. Should we do picks?
Let's do picks of the week. And I'm going to start with James's pick because I opened it because it had the word tornado in it. And I'm like, I'm going to open this and see what it is. And so it's made me mad because I don't know what a tornado outbreak is now. And now my head's spitted and I contradicted myself. And so, Harold's over here cheering but it was a link to the worst U.S. tornado outbreaks of all time. And it was a compilation. It looks like it's from weather5280.com, Brandon Heberton. It was his Twitter here. So I think he compiled this and I'm just scrolling along and I get down to Joplin is on the list. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. James and I said that's not a tornado outbreak, but there were 54 tornadoes that occurred that day. And I said to Kim, when she politely asked me my definition of a tornado outbreak, I said, it depended on how many occurred. I contradicted myself in one sentence. And so I don't even know what a tornado outbreak is because the focus is Joplin. So but there were 54 tornadoes. Mm-hmm. Was it an outbreak or not?
If Joplin had not occurred, would anyone even consider that day an outbreak day?
I don't know. I don't know anything.
Jen would have if she used
based on my
definition.
Yes, based on my definition of how many occurred, yes. But there were not just little baby tornadoes. There were some that were rated
baby tornadoes.
Yes, that were not F0s, which I should not have said that. There were F2s. EF2s, there were some that were higher rated. And so, but comparison to, and there were EF3s down in northeastern Oklahoma. So I contradicted myself. So this conversation has been fabulous to open up. What exactly are we saying when we're talking about a tornado outbreak? Because I am into tornado history and I've been a meteorologist forever and I still don't even know. And I don't know how to define it. So if I can't figure it out and how to define it, should we even be using the verbiage? Should we be using something else to communicate? And I think that there's a lot of conversations, and I want to continue to follow y'all's work because I want to learn how to communicate this better, not only for my radio stations. They don't really ask me a lot, but I did have a Q&A this year from Kansas City that was like, do you think that Joplin was a tornado? I think they used tornado swarm or something. And that's how they threw it at me. And I'm like, I don't know what to say here, but the focus was so much on Joplin. But so I don't know if the Joplin day was an outbreak or not. So you guys do the research and let me know. And my pick of the week, not knowing that we were going to have Paulina on and that we were going to have this discussion, was the European database directing folks to go to check out the Czech Republic tornado. We're currently, and so you can go to the database and then just do a quick search for Czech Republic. Currently, it's still in the database as an EF3, but as Harold mentioned, it looks like more research is being done. It could have been EF4. They have a video on there that shows helicopter flyover of the damage. They have other links. We actually have somebody who's part of the Tornado Talk server who's from the Czech Republic and was giving us some links this morning. Plop that right into Google Translate so we can see what was going on and read through that as well. So I would check that out. It is a very thorough database, and you can go find several links in there already about this very momentous tornado.
That's fantastic. I guess I'll follow up with that with my pick of the week. It's a newspaper in Oregon reporting on some of the early heat-related health effects that are being experienced there. And that includes linkages to, of course, heat illness, but also increase in the preponderance of drownings as people are turning to water to try to stay cool. So I'm sure that the final accounting is what happened in Texas. The final accounting might not be known for some time, but I think we're all kind of curious to know how anyone is making it there, and the story details a little bit of what's going on. How about we turn to Troy? Troy, do you have a pick of the week?
No, I kind of was going to use the Quileute thing with the heat, but I find it interesting. I love the discussion that Harold and Paulina, in talking about, what is an outbreak. This is one thing that I think Tom Grzoulis has asked a lot about as he has gotten his new version together. I'm waiting for that. Come on, Tom. Because he's even asked that question too. What if we're going to make a list of these, we better define what an outbreak is. And so if I did a pick of the week, it would be for Tom Grzoulis's page and the forthcoming versions that will be flying off the shelf.
Fantastic. Thank you. I know that we, maybe surprised our guests a little bit. I think Harold might be expecting this. I don't know if Paulina is. Paulina, do you have a pick of the week? Oh, I think
Sure.
I might be able to guess what it is. But go ahead. What's your pick?
Well, it's kind of connected with what I'm preparing right now for the general exam and reading a lot of papers associated with all different kind of stuff, but one that is recently being published. And again, it will be a little bit about tornadoes because this is the nature of my research, but it's Todd Moore. He published in June a paper called Climatology and Trends of Tornado Favorable Atmospheric Ingredients in the United States. I read that paper. It's really interesting. I really would like to recommend. It is interesting how this topic about tornadoes and environment is really maybe popular right now, especially given the changes in temperature, the climate change, and how all of that is interconnected. So that would be my pick.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I thought I might be able to guess because I thought you might pick Bill Hook's book. You're just going to pick up a book off your desk and say, this is my pick of everything always. I carry this around with me. So I've got to say, I'm a little surprised that wasn't it, but your pick was really good.
No, it is.
Thank you. Thank you. I still recommend this one. I still carry it everywhere. So yes, absolutely. But actually that paper was also quite interesting. And I read this just yesterday. So it's a good one.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And last but not least, Harold, do you have a pick for us?
Sure. Yeah, Jen took the one I was going to give, so I'll give
Oops.
the rest of the holy trinity of European storm links. One is the forecasting link, which is estofex, estofex.org. They don't make a forecast every day, but most days they do, and it's an SPC-like product, and then occasionally some meta-scale discussions. And then the research side, ESSL, the European Severe Storms Laboratory, ESSL.org, that they're the primary sponsor of the European conferences on severe storms. They do a lot of training stuff, and some of their training stuff is online. They actually are just like we do a spring experiment in the U.S. They do a severe weather experiment there. I've been there once for the experiment, and in Wiener Neustadt. If you ever go to Wiener Neustadt, Austria, there's an incredible schnitzel place. Incredible. That is next door to ESSL. It's perfectly placed. But ESSL, they'll be having actually a webinar on Wednesday morning that will include a discussion of last week's tornado. They're only about 100 miles from the tornado path, and so some of them are involved in the damage to everyone. So estofex and ESSL are the two places I'd go to. So.
Fantastic, great. Well, Jen, I think that we can wrap this up. We have done all the things that we've gone over are already longer showtime by like 17 minutes.
Yes. Well, I turned into a pumpkin 18 minutes ago, and anything I've said since that point should be disregarded, including baby tornadoes. So please ignore that. And I think that somebody not on the East Coast should close out this show before I continue to speak any more gibberish.
All right,
Troy, you close it out. Yeah, you're
Troy, please. You are so good at this.
You are.
I'm gaveling for adjournment of this meeting. A second, please.
Second.
A good big third. Out of here. That was awesome, guys. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
We'll see y'all.
Good.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
And they're done. Okay. It's this magical simulcast, WeatherBrains and Song of the Night. WeatherBrains on YouTube, Song of the Night on Instagram. It's where they meet, the intersection. But anyway, great to have Harold and Paulina on the show tonight. Had a really good discussion about tornadoes. Loved it. Thank you guys for watching on the WeatherBrains side. If you want to join us on the gram, it's Span WX. We'll see you guys next Monday night. Thank you guys for watching. Have a